Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be available on the Township's YouTube page. Notice is hereby given that under the authority of the Municipal Act 2001 and in accordance with Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, all information obtained is considered part of the public record. Could I have a motion to adopt the agenda, please? Would we do this at this time? And this would include an amendment to the closed session that will be following the open meeting. Sorry, who moved that? Wenda and Sherry, all in favor? That is carried, thank you. Any declarations of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? None declared. So we have a public meeting this evening to discuss development charges. This is being held pursuant to the Development Charges Act 1997 regarding proposed development charge rates and policies that will be applied throughout the township. It is proposed that enactment of a development charges bylaw by council would occur on Monday, November 18th, 2024. Council shall hear in person or by his or her counsel, solicitor, or agent any person who claims to be affected by this bylaw. The recommendation is that the presentation from John Murphy, DFA Infrastructure International Incorporated, Township of Stone Mills 2024 Development Charges Background Study and Draft Bylaw and public comments be received, and that the draft Development Charges Bylaw be brought to the November 18th, 2024 Council meeting for consideration. Could I get a motion to that effect to get this on the floor, please? Councillor Fenwick and Deputy Reeve Davison, thank you. So initially, we'll have a presentation by Mr. Murphy of DFA, who did our background study on development charges, and I believe he is joining us by Zoom. Mr. Murphy, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Very good. The floor is yours, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everyone. I'm John Murphy. I'm here on behalf of DFA Infrastructure to present the draft background study and DC bylaw. And as noted, this is the statutory public meeting that's required to be held under the Development Charges Act. And the process is to present the background study and the bylaw and receive any comments from the public in respect to the background study and bylaw. So the objective of today's presentation and members of the council, this is a very similar presentation to what was presented to you earlier. But the objective is to provide a background on the development charges, present the draft DC study and calculated rates, discuss the DC bylaw and policy decisions that are still to be made, present the next steps, and then obtain feedback from the public should there be any. So in regards to development charges, there are fees levied against new development that recovers the capital cost required to service the anticipated new growth. We've all heard this. The principle behind development charges is that growth pays for growth, and that there is not an undue burden on existing taxpayers for the cost of the anticipated new growth. Now, it should be noted to everyone that the development charges do not pay for the operating cost of the capital infrastructure or pay for the replacement of that infrastructure. It's just the one-time cost to put in place the infrastructure that's required to service the anticipated new growth. So the requirements for imposing development charges, now municipalities are given the authority to impose development charges under the Development Charges Act. Now the Act requires that the following steps be taken. One is the preparation of the background study, which is completed. Hold at least one public meeting, which is being held today, and then pass a bylaw, and that's the I guess the authority for municipalities to impose the charge. Now, these bylaws are only valid for 10 years. So this exercise needs to be undertaken, I guess, in 2034. Now, again, this is the township's first bylaw, so we'll make sure we do it right. So the draft bylaw consists of a number of components. One is the development forecast. This is the residential and non-residential growth that's expected to occur in the township over the next 10 years and 20 years. Now, there's a thing called the historic service levels. The act requires that municipalities not impose a charge that would provide a level of service for the new growth that exceeds the average level of service over the previous 15 years. So it's almost like an exercise that assures that a gold-plated service isn't what's being paid for out of development charge revenues. And then, of course, the capital program, and these are the capital expenditures that are required to be incurred to support the anticipated new growth. So the Act indicates there's a number of services that are eligible for development charges. And working with staff, we identified the 7 services that will have a development charge component. Growth studies, that seems to be the largest, as in the number of capital expenditures to be incurred over the next 10 years to service anticipated growth. And they include the next iteration of the development charge, preparation of the development charge background study. I think there's some policy work that's included. There's outdoor recreation, indoor recreation, fire services. There's, I guess, an expansion to the Yarker Fire Hall, waste diversion, transportation services. I believe there's a salt dome that's included, and storm sewers. So in regards to the anticipated growth, it appears that the municipality is looking at a residential population growth of about 833 new residents over the next 10 years, and 1,621 over the next 20 years. That translates into approximately 300 dwelling units in the next 10 years and 525 over the next 20 years. Now there is the employment growth that gets converted to new floor area, or in this case, square meters. So there's an anticipated 13,000 new square meters of non-residential floor space over the next 10 years, and approximately 26,000 new square meters of non-residential floor space over the next 20 years. So in regards to the historic service level, you can see how some services this exercise does not apply to. So it's really in regards to growth studies, waste diversion, and storm services, where there's other service standards that dictate the required service levels. But for outdoor recreation, indoor recreation, fire services, transportation services, we had to look at the historic service levels, and that's the limit in regards to the net growth-related capital costs that can be recovered from development charges for each of those services. Now, you'll see that the cap does come into play in regards to fire services, because the Yarker Fire Hall expansion is quite expensive. So the growth-related net capital cost related to the fire services that can't be recovered through development charges through this iteration can be recovered in the next preparation of the next development charge background study. So when we look at the total capital cost, now this is the gross capital cost, because there are a number of required deductions to be made to these costs. So out of all the capital projects that have a growth component, we're looking at around $5.6, $5.7 million over the next 10 years. So the next slide shows the various deductions that are required, statutory deductions that are required to be made to the costs. And the largest component is the benefit to existing development. So a project that has a growth component, to a large degree, many projects, unless it's 100% growth related, there's a portion that benefits existing residential and non-residential population. And those calculations were made, and it was identified approximately $3.6 million of the 5.6 benefits existing population and cannot be recovered from the development charge revenues. So we're now down to about 2 million. Now, as I said earlier, fire services, the service level cap kicks in, and about $325,000 cannot be recovered through this development charge iteration. It would be recovered in the next iteration, which is be 2034. So at the end of the day, the township is looking at approximately $1.7 million in net growth-related capital costs that can be recovered through the future anticipated growth. So the next step in the process is allocating that $1.7 million between the residential population growth and the non-residential population growth. And you can see how for the majority of services, the allocation was prorated based on the residential population and non-residential population. However, the outdoor and indoor recreation services mainly benefit the residential population, but we put a small percentage, 5%, to benefit non-residential growth, which is typically the industry standard. So this slide presents what we call, well, it shows the adjusted and unadjusted calculated charges. Now, the unadjusted is really the residential share divided by the anticipated residential growth to give you the rate per service. And in regards to the non-residential, it's the non-residential share divided by the anticipated growth in gross floor area. So at the bottom, you can see there's an unadjusted municipal-wide charge of $18,062 for the residential and $22.72 for the non-residential. But what we do is we look at the cash flow, we look at the timing of the expenditure versus the timing of the anticipated revenue over the next 10 years. And there are give and takes, I guess, in regards to whether there's additional funds in the development charge reserve or there's a deficit because the capital project was undertaken early in the process, which means that there will be borrowing required and there's interest that would be eligible for recovery. So when we look at the cash flow adjustment, the anticipated charges for residential drop from $1,862 to $1,776, and the non-residential charge drops from $22.72 to $21.73. So those are the charges that are used in regards to calculating what the charges for per residential dwelling type. And that's next slide will show for residential dwelling types, we have single family and semi-detached. And we look at the occupancy factor or the person per unit. And we apply that factor to the charge per capita to calculate what the residential rate by dwelling type is. And so you can see the three different types of dwelling units that the township would have in regards to development charges. One would be single and semi-detached, one would be for multiple units, and one would be for apartments. So when we look at the calculated adjusted charge based on the PPU for residential dwelling type, you're looking at 4,500, about 4548 for single and semi-detached, 3279 for apartment units, and 4379 for other multiples. So that's the other multiples is really a catch-all in regards to if it's not a single or semi, and if it's not an apartment, it's a multiple. Next slide. Now, we've looked at a number of municipalities in your vicinity in regards to how the calculated charge would fall in regards to magnitude. And as you can see, the proposed charge for single family is somewhat less than the average charge of the comparable municipalities. Same goes for the non-residential charge. So you're looking at around 33 or actually 50% less. The township's charge is approximately 50% less, or the township's proposed charge is approximately 50% less than the average of these comparable municipalities. So in my previous presentation, again, I noted that there are a number of policy decisions that need to be made by council prior to passing the final bylaw in November. And I'll be working with staff to ensure that those details are provided to council, and council can make those decisions. So again, the bylaw grants the authority for municipality to impose a charge on new development. It also sets out the charges as calculated pursuant to the DC Act, which I just discussed. But it also presents the rules for imposing the charge, including the types of development to be exempt from the charge. Now, there are a number of statutory exemptions, but most, if not all, bylaws, municipal bylaw, development charge bylaws also exempt certain types of development from the charge. But these are called discretionary exemptions, and council will need to make those decisions to include those exemptions in the bylaw. There's other decisions such as whether council may want to either phase in this charge, seeing that it's new. They also may want to discount types of development. Some municipalities discount industrial development from the development charge to encourage the location of new industrial growth in the municipality. Now, with that said, any exemption that's granted is, in essence, foregone revenue. Because if you exempt a type of development, then you forego the charges that would be imposed and the revenue generated from those types of development. And the lost revenue cannot be recovered through an increase in development charge on other types of development. And of course, there's a number of other rules and policy decisions that council needs to consider. So in regards to discretionary exemptions, all the municipal development charge bylaws that I know exempt agricultural use development. They also exempt places of worship, public hospitals, temporary buildings and structures such as garages, although it's a residential use, it's not a dwelling unit. And of course, temporary buildings and structures, that's something where like a seasonal fabric structure would be erected, and it requires a building permit, and that would be captured under the development charges bylaw unless it's specifically exempt. Redevelopment credits, now that's while not statutorily required, case law does require municipalities to give consideration for the redevelopment of land where a structure previously existed. Now sometimes there's a structure gets destroyed by fire or it gets demolished to be redeveloped. So credits for the services that were provided are given in consideration for the redevelopment of that land. Again, we talked about phasing in and discounting. So the next steps, today we have the public meeting. I think we're looking at, maybe it's November 11th. I have 18th here in regards to the approval of the development charges bylaw. Now, the bylaw can come into force when it's approved, the date it's approved, or it may be approved, come into force at a later date pursuant to council's resolution, whether it's January 1st, that's up to council. And now there is a 40-day appeal period, and I said December 28th, that's based on November 18th, so it would be December 21st if it's November the 11th, the passing of the bylaw. So with that, I will leave it to any questions and comments from the public.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Murphy. So those who have attended, do you have any comments or questions that you want to bring forward? Mr. Storing, do you want to come up to the microphone there? And I think we all know who you are, but for the official record, you have to state your name and your address. Robert?
Got to push that button first.
Yep.
I'm Robert Storing. I'm from Tamworth. I do appreciate that Mr. Murphy was here to, on the screen anyways, to explain all of this paperwork. I went through it about 3 times, and I won't pretend to understand all the figures in it, that's for sure. I do have a couple of questions just from things that Mr. Murphy said. One of my questions is are development charges applied at time of creation of a lot or a parcel, or at time of building permit?
In this case, it would be the time of the issuance of the building permit.
Okay, then you also said that, if I heard right, development charges would apply if a residence, for example, were destroyed by fire or torn down or something. Why would they apply then? Because there was already a residence there.
Because unless the bylaw specifically provides the redevelopment credit, a building permit would trigger the development charge. So you demolish your building, and you come in, you apply for development charge. You apply for a building permit. The bylaw says a charge shall be levied. So we'll ensure that, subject to council's approval, that there's a provision that says the property will be, depending upon the wording, it's usually someone has up to 2, 5, or 10 years, whatever period of time council chooses to go with, to redevelop a property that was previously destroyed or demolished without being subject to development charge. So it'll be spelled out. So the building official will ensure that you will not have to pay a development charge, provided that the evidence shows that that property was destroyed or demolished within the time frame presented in the bylaw.
Okay. One of the statistics you gave was, or a couple of them, was growth over the next 10 years and then projected for another 10 years after that. The growth, when I read through it, my figures were a little bit different. I don't know if it was a different report than what you just gave, but the growth was for something like 750 people, maybe 750 and a half, I don't know, over the next 10 years. And residential, and I only looked at residential because we aren't certainly a big industrial or commercial component here. But residential growth, and I think building units, was listed at 298 over the next 10 years. So roughly 30 per year. What are the stats for the previous 10 years? How many dwelling units average were built per year for the previous 10 years? What I'm asking is where those figures came from.
Well, they came from the county's growth analysis report. So the county prepared a report in 2021 that showed anticipated growth throughout the county.
Too bad that wasn't attached to your report. I'd like to have seen that. So what was the average growth?
I don't have that information here.
Why not? You've made this big presentation and given us figures, but we need to know what those figures are based on.
It's based on the county's report that they presented, and I'm sure council was probably presented to the Township Council.
Yeah, I'd like to see that report, that's for sure. Anyways, okay, I do appreciate your report. It's very complicated to try and read it, that's for darn sure. But I did a number of times, and I'm going to be fairly brief. I'm sure your report to council justifies passing the development charges. I actually am certainly not in favor of development charges, mainly because it flies in the face of all other levels of government that are trying to reduce the price of housing, and here you guys are increasing them. Our building permit fees just recently went up anywhere from, I think, 50 to 150%, and I did write to council about that. You know, and the justification was, well, they were always low. Well, that's too bad. It's the wrong time to do it, that's for sure. Based on a price of $4,500 per unit or per house, I'll say, and $3,200 per unit in multi-residential units, that cost will be definitely passed right on to the consumer. If I were severing a lot and had to pay it with the severance on the lot, I'd bill it right into the price that I sold that lot for. If a consumer buys that lot and goes to build a house on it, they got to pay that, I assume, right up front. So the study says that the infrastructure costs, sewer and water and roads, would be recovered through the development charges. Well, we don't have sewer and water, we know that, other than storm sewers. And roads, if it's a development in a subdivision or, more than just a severance or two severances, then the roads are covered by the developer. That's part of his development costs when he builds. Existing roads would be covered, I would expect, for the age of a house anyways, with taxes. You're gonna get, probably average $3,500 a year tax for every house that's built on there for the next 100 years. I have a question, partly related to the new units that were just built behind the fire hall in Tamworth. With this new development charge being introduced, does that go against the policy of either the federal or provincial government, whereby they'll give grants to assist townships with increasing the housing supply? I don't know if it does or not. From what I've read of those policies, it would, because they're trying to bring the cost down, and here we are putting the costs up. I don't know if you can answer that, John, or if anybody can answer that or not.
I certainly can't answer that. That would be a question to be put to the planning department. And,
Or to our member of parliament, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, provincial parliament, because if it did, then I would question, I assume that those new buildings at the fire hall in Tamworth had some, I'm not sure if it was federal or provincial money went into those. Provincial, I think.
It was provincial, but it was, I think 2 million was the upper tier funding.
Yeah.
But by the time we got around to pricing everything and building it, we had to kick in $1 million, we being the county, from reserves, because the cost had gone up to the neighborhood.
But there was a higher government input into it, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
So had they been aware, if this process was in process 3 months before those things were approved, would we have got it, I wonder? If it flies in the face of what they want to do with improving the number of housing units?
Well,
Maybe not.
it's certainly a valid question. It would have added, since those are multi-units, it would have added whatever it is, 3,500 or something per unit.
Yeah.
There's 8 units there. It would have added maybe 30,000 to the cost. Out of 3 million, that's adding 1%.
Yeah.
I doubt if it would have stalled the funding, but that's just a matter of opinion.
You don't know, because I actually, and it has nothing to do with this, I read an article in the Star the other day that Toronto is threatened with having their additional funding from the federal government pulled back because of new costs that they're putting on for developing properties. So I don't know. I'm not going to hold you up and bore you trying to go through this report, because I don't understand it all. I understand a lot of it, but not all of it. I will say that if I or anybody else decided to engage a consultant like this and pay for an expensive study, I could probably have a study done that shows that development charges don't work or that aren't good just as easily as this one was done. But I do want to say that sometimes, and especially in a time like this when housing is in such short supply and all levels of government are trying to increase housing supply and increase housing units, sometimes common sense should prevail. And today is one of those days. To me, common sense really should dictate what council decides. I don't know when might be the right time to bring charges in, development charges. Now, sometime in the future, probably should have been done 25 years ago. But right now is not the time to do it. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Anyone else? Did you want to have anything to say, Marilyn? Okay. Jake, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to point out that whether or not everyone's aware that development charges actually were applied to that those 8 units in Tamworth through the educational development charges that we've been paying for years to 2 different school boards now that are trying to fund projects that will be built outside of this township. The Catholic School Board, we're now up to $600 on every new house that goes to the Catholic School Board, and I'm just not sure all members of the public are aware of that. But yeah, they can kind of do that and even raise prices almost year to year without any public, without really any. There's nothing really Stone Mills Township can do about it. So, and we just get the bill in the mail and the notification. So anyways, just wanted to point that out. Thanks, Your Worship.
Thanks. Yes, certainly, yeah.
Just a quick comment to that, just because a school board, no matter what school board it is, charges a development charge, or the list of charges from other municipalities that were shown to us, just because they charge them doesn't justify us charging. We don't have to be led around by other townships or other boards. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Yes, Councillor Woodcock.
One question for the presenter. Can you let me know, I know there are mandatory exemptions, and I believe affordable housing is a mandatory exemption, and it doesn't have a development charge that applies. Same for nonprofit housing. If you could clarify if that is accurate.
That's correct, yes.
So that means that they wouldn't have applied to the
In
affordable
Tamworth.
housing unit.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you for that clarification. Anyone else have any questions for Mr. Murphy or any comments on the development charges proposal? I should point out that the language in the report saying it will be passed on such and such a date, Council has made no decision as to whether or not development charge bylaw will be adopted. This is all a what-if scenario. So
That's
Council
correct.
has to think about what's been proposed, take into consideration the public comments, which so far are from Mr. Storing. I don't believe we've had any written input at this point, but yeah, go ahead.
I'm amazed that there are not more people here. I really am. I'm amazed and disappointed that there's not more people here.
I'm a bit surprised too. I know of one of your professional colleagues was quite vocal on Facebook about opposing development charges, and I'd hoped that person would be here. But it's not too late for comment. There's a public comment period. There's also an appeal period of 40 days should a development charges bylaw pass. So this isn't sort of a preordained situation by any means. Yes, Councillor Lalande.
So this is for Mr. Murphy. Just a quick question. The Development Charges Act was implemented in 1997, which is almost 25 years ago or more even. And in view of the current climate, which Mr. Story has outlined, can you at all imagine that the government might be looking at this act to say that it doesn't apply anymore with the rising cost of housing, and that here we are getting ready to apply development charges that I think theoretically should be dropped to help the homeowners build more affordable houses? I mean, this is a 25-year-old act. What are your thoughts? What's your experience with this level of government?
It's, the Development Charge Act has been amended twice in the last several years. And the second iteration was to reverse some of the amendments they had made previously. So they have looked at this bylaw up and down, and they've made changes which they feel would support the creation of new dwelling units. Now, it has to be said that when we look at smaller municipalities that have a lot of infill or one-off developments, sure, a development charge kind of seems like an extra charge on that new dwelling unit. Larger municipalities that have large tracts of land that can't service that land unless they get some money to build, let's say, a water treatment plant. You're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars, and developers are more than happy to pay the development charge to get that water treatment plant built so they can build their or develop their properties. So this is a fair and equitable way to allocate the cost of new growth to those that benefit from the services that are put in place. Now, the charge of $5,000, yes, it seems like a lot. I don't know if it's Mississauga or Aurora, but some of the GTA municipalities, their development charges are close to $100,000. And that is what people get concerned about when you're adding, 10%, 15% to the cost of a new property or new house. Again, The costs that were identified are costs that will be incurred. And it's just how those costs are paid for. Is it the taxpayer? Now, taxpayer may be quite upset that, okay, we have to expand the Yorker Fire Hall to be able to service existing population and the anticipated new growth. Should the taxpayer, today's taxpayer, pay for that expansion that would benefit the new dwelling units and new non-residential square feet? So it's a zero-sum game. Someone has to pay, and what the Development Charge Act tries to do is fairly and equitably allocate those costs between the existing resident, taxpayer, ratepayer, or those that are going to be building or developing properties that are driving the need for those additional capital expenditures. So it's an attempt to fairly allocate the cost of new growth to the new growth. And that's why the act is quite detailed, because it ensures that municipalities don't overcharge the new growth. If anything, there's maybe I shouldn't say this, but there's a good argument to say that new growth really doesn't pay its cost. It's, it's their fair share. It's what they believe the fair share is. But it's a zero-sum game. Someone has to pay for these costs. Is it the existing taxpayer, or is it those that benefit from those expenditures, anticipated new growth?
Thanks, Mr. Murphy. I'll take Crystal and then Robert again. Go ahead.
A couple of thoughts. Well, I just wanted to suggest a couple like resources. I looked up this report. It's really hard to find research that's rural focused. You know, we end up hearing about water services, and it's like that doesn't apply here, and it's hard to find rural focused things. But there's a report from AMO. It's from 2019. It had some interesting. It's called The Importance of Development Charges, and it was a submission to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing on increasing housing supply in Ontario, again, January 2019, and had a couple interesting points. I just want to share one. Now this, it's also, I agree with Mr. Storing that it's hard when you're trying to find like an unbiased look, right? You're like, everyone's coming from one angle or another, and it's really hard to get a full picture. But they had one interesting example about the impact of development charges on growth, and it was an area of Ottawa where in two different areas they lowered development charges in one area, and that had no impact on the cost of housing. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Again, it's a city, it's hard to compare in our setting. But one of the things I also do think to consider as a rural area is that we do tend to have a higher, our demographics are older, and that tends to be people that are on more of a fixed income. And so the idea of development paying for itself rather than going on the tax bill for seniors who may not have as much disposable income, I think is something that we need to consider, and that's a rural fact for us. I think that's, oh, and another thought I had is that I'm also surprised there aren't enough people here. So I would be also open to us having, I know, not to delay or something, but another public meeting, one in which, you know, maybe we try to get to hear from more voices. I would think that would be a benefit. I think that there are definitely people that have opinions on this, and let's try and get them here so we can hear from them, so.
Thank you. Robert, something to add?
I'll be very brief, just a brief rebuttal to what Mr. Murphy just said, and he used the sewage treatment plant as an example. You can bet your boots that when a developer has to pay $5,000 or whatever the development charge may be to increase that sewage treatment plant, it's going to get passed on to the consumer. The developer isn't going to eat that cost. It's going to be built into the price of whatever he's building and yada, yada. And just for interest, the last time I checked, the development charges in the city of Toronto were $110,000 per lot.
Thank you, Robert. Anyone else? Yes, Councillor Fenwick.
Just a lot of good conversation going on here. And I just did a little quick math just for Snickers, because really what we're talking about is dollars. We're talking about amounts. Would this stop or slow development if we were to implement these? And $5,000, and it's rounding it off, over a 30-year, term for a mortgage, which is 360 months, pre-interest is $15 a month. So, no, I agree. For sure. But the when you think that you're paying it up front, but you're probably likely borrowing it from an institution, I'm not sure if that would stop or stall development. Just a thought.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, go ahead,
Oh,
Councillor
yeah, and just
Woodcock.
on numbers, I did do some numbers in terms of like percentage-wise. So like, I don't know if you can build a house for $200,000, but if you could, $4,500 would be 2.25%. On a $400,000 house, it'd be 1.125%. And on a $500,000 house, it'd be 0.9%. So if we think that that might slow development, those are quite small percentages, just as a percentage-wise. Just wanted to.
Thank you, Councillor Woodcock. Anyone else? I did have a question, Mr. Murphy, in regard to the outdoor recreation calculation. We have a parkland levy charge. I think it's 5%. Jake, do you know off the top of your head? 2,500? Yeah. It's a flat fee then. Yeah. Was that taken into consideration when you did your calculations for the outdoor recreation portion of the development charge, Mr. Murphy?
Yes, parkland dedication pays for the land. The outdoor recreation development charge pays for the improvement of that land, such as playgrounds and whatnot, the installation of playgrounds. It does not pay for.
Okay, thank you. So unless there's anything further, we'll have to consider Councillor Woodcock's suggestion. We have a second public meeting at some point, whether that's by motion or not. But right now we do have a motion on the floor. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you, John Murphy.
Thank you.
Can I make a motion that we do have another public meeting? Thank you.
Any discussion?
Brief-wise.
Yes.
Can I get clarification when council would like to hold that public meeting? Do you have a preferred date?
No, I don't.
So this would affect possibly the meeting at which the bylaw is to be discussed and potentially adopted? Are there certain timelines that have to be observed after a public meeting in that regard?
Through Reeve-wise, so we've already met the notice requirements under the Act, so we can schedule it for the next council meeting or the first meeting in November, which would be November 4th.
What's your preference, mover and seconder? That will give more time to publicize it.
Yes.
Yeah. Any discussion? Yes, Councillor Fenwick.
I think November 4th is good too, because by then we may have Councillor McDonald back for participation.
Oh, I certainly hope so. Anything further? All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Right. We have no deputations or presentations. Items for consideration. 8.1 is Jay Dearborn, Canadian Olympian, bobsleigh, Canada pilot. Good night, Robert. Request for donation. The recommendation is that council receive the request from Jay Dearborn. Can I get a motion to that effect? Deputy Reeve Davison, Councillor Milligan. So I assume everybody's read this. It's basically a straightforward donation request from our local resident. I believe Jay's from Yarker. He has a nice picture with the Stone Mills Township logo on a bobsled. What are your wishes? Yes, Councillor Davison. Deputy Reeve, rather, I'm sorry.
Now, Jay has provided us with a good bit of information here, and they've lost significant federal funding, so they are under a crunch this year. Last year, we supported them to the tune of $1,000, and I think we can afford to do that. I checked with our treasurer today, and our donations are in order. I'd like to see us support them again this year with a donation of $1,000.
That's a motion?
Yes.
Is there a seconder? Yes.
Reeve-wise, so we have a motion on the floor to
Sorry, you're
receive.
right.
So if we just do a friendly amendment to receive the request and donate in the amount of $1,000.
Okay, and Councillor Milligan, you second that. Any discussion? What is our donation budget at this point? Anita, can you give us a ballpark figure there?
Through you, Wise, our budget is standing at approximately $8,000, leaving
Okay.
$4,000 still available.
Very good, thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor? That's carried. Oh, you did have something, Wendy? Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to ask council if we would like to consider looking at this at the end of the year, and if there's any money left in that budget, that we do an additional donation.
Oh, we can certainly have a look at it at the end of the year. You don't have to make that a motion at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Okay, all in favor? That's carried, thanks. Next item, 8.2, Hollow Square Market, Hallows Eve Special Event Permit Application. The recommended motion is that Hollow Square Market, Hallows Eve Special Event Permit Application. What is the recommendation? Sorry, I'm reading the wrong thing. Is that council deem the Hollow Square Markets to receive it and deem it a special event as municipally significant, I'll get there, and direct the clerk to issue a letter to the applicant to convey council's approval of the request. Was there anything else you wanted in that, Brandy?
Sorry, Reeve-wise, just also to delegate authority to staff to issue the special event permit once they provide all of their documentation, but nothing further to add to that.
Okay, thank you. Any motion to that effect? Councillor Lalonde, seconded by Councillor Milligan. Any discussion? All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Number 9 is our consent agenda. These are items which are more or less routine or don't necessarily need discussion. The recommendation would be that all items on the consent agenda dated October 7th, 24 be approved as presented and that the necessary action be taken. You're perfectly free to ask that one be taken out. Did you? No? Can I get a motion to that effect then? Councillor Milligan, Councillor Woodcock, anyone wish to pull anything out of that? All in favor then? That's carried. Thank you. Okay. Now we have minutes from our September 16th meeting. Sorry, yeah? Oh, that was in consent, right. Yes, I've got to get down to 11. Not used to the consent agenda yet. Yeah, I'll get there. Yeah, maybe in the next 2 years. So no consent agenda items were extracted. I would like to mention, though, to welcome our new Development Services Clerk on board. I have not met Owen Wood yet, but I'm glad to have him aboard. Jason, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, just wanted to welcome him officially, but also note that you may have had the opportunity to meet him at our last meeting because he was available just shortly after our Committee of Adjustment meeting before we went into our training session that night.
Thank you. Do we have any direct motion, notice of motion? Yes, Deputy Reeve Davison.
I'd like to speak to direct motion. I'd like to bring to attention of the council that a past clerk of the township, Gerald Wilson's passed away. Our policy, our flag policy, declares a whole segment of order of where the flag is lowered. Unfortunately, it doesn't say it to be lowered for past employees. Gerald was an employee of Camden East Township. He was the clerk, treasurer, actually clerk both at one time for about 20 years, okay, for quite a long period of time. So I'd like to start a discussion before around, I think we should lower the flag for past employees, recognizing it's hard to keep track of. So, I mean, I would say that if we're notified, we should lower the flag. Barring that, there's also a line item in the flag policy that says council by order can lower the flag for significant individuals. The reason I feel strongly about this is Gerald may be a past employee of many, many years ago, but we have other past employees, for example, past road superintendents, past clerks, treasurers in the township who have recently left us and are, quite current in their standing. And I think it would be a shame not to honor those people that put 30, 35 years in for it. So I'd like to make a motion that we change our policy to lower the flag for past employees if we are notified of a past employee's passing.
Is there a support for that? Councillor Woodcock? Any discussion? I'm wondering, does the current policy stipulate a certain time? Is it always the same amount of time that a flag is lowered? Is it a week or a day?
I think 3 days, isn't it? It doesn't, I don't think it actually states.
Yeah, Brandy, do you recall?
Through you, Reeve-Wise, it does speak to timeframes. I believe it speaks to a certain time frame after the funeral of the deceased, a few days.
Councillor Milligan, did you? Yeah, okay.
Reeve-Wise,
Yeah, go
if I
ahead.
may, can we also include in that motion that staff be directed to lower the flags for the passing? Thank you.
Okay, anything further on that one? All in favor? That's carried, thank you. It's a good idea, Doug. Okay, any announcements? Anyone have any announcements? None declared. So we do have a closed meeting pursuant to Section 239 of the Municipal Act. This is advice subject to solicitor-client privilege. Motion is that Council of Stone Mills go into closed session to discuss that. Can I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Milligan, Councillor Fenwick, all in favor? That's carried, thank you. We'll take 5. my microphone on. So we have just come out of a closed session, and now where's our, I got to get to my final here. So in continuing interest of transparency and open government, the REIV is reporting that in open session that the following outcomes from today's closed session meeting were direction provided to staff, and that's all that happened. We don't need a motion. We need a motion to approve that. Okay, Councillor Milligan and Deputy Reeve Davison, all in favor? That is carried. I need a motion for our confirming bylaw. Councillor Land, Councillor Milligan, all in favor? That's carried. And a motion to adjourn. Councillor Woodcock, Councillor Fenwick, all in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much.